There are some Quislings who, amazingly, have been fondly remembered, at least by some. Leon Degrelle, Emil Hatcher, Andrei Vlasov, even some like Wang Jingwei have a few supporters. But then there are people like Vidkun Kvishling, who have barely any supporters, and in fact are often hated, even by Nazis and fascists themselves. And included in that category are people like Vojtech Tuka, who, in spite of the fact that his boss has seen a rehabilitation of reputation, has never quite seen one. Vojtech Tuka, who, early on, often used the Hungarian name of Bela, was born in Hegibania, in Hont County, Slovakia, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, on July 4th, 1880, and even from a young age was highly intelligent. He studied law at the universities of Budapest, Berlin and Paris, and soon became the youngest professor in the kingdom, and taught law, including, from 1914 to 1919, at the Elizabethan University, in Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia. After the university was dissolved, he then worked as an editor, writing about legal issues and other things. In 1918, the state of Czechoslovakia was formed, uniting Czechs and Slovaks, with its capital in the Czech capital, Prague. As you'd expect, this was a very Czech-centric system, with the Slovak language routinely being discriminated against, and there only being one Slovak library. In addition, the Czechs tried to secularize the religious Catholic Slovaks, which offended many. In 1918, Tuka, from a mixture of political opportunism and genuine conviction, conveniently dropped his Hungarian name and joined the Slovak People's Party, led by Andrej Hlinka, which called for Slovak autonomy and language rights. In 1919, he was elected to the Presidium of the Christian Socialist Party as a nominee of the Slovak section. In 1923, he also founded the Home Guard, an armed militia with a pro-Slovak orientation. Very busy, also in that time, he was a deputy in the Czech Parliament. Soon, however, he would be less busy, on account of being in jail. In 1918, he published an article called Vacuum Juris, alleging there was a secret, suppressed annex of the founding document of Czechoslovakia, stating that the agreement was only valid for 10 years, and that, after 1918, Prague's law would be illegitimate in Slovakia. This was motivated by Czech oppression against Slovaks, but naturally, the Czech government didn't agree and charged Tuka with espionage and high treason. He was found guilty, and, on October 5th, 1929, he was sentenced to 15 years in jail and lost his civil rights for 3 years, which somehow was a thing back then, and ended up serving 10 years of this sentence. Understandably, this radicalised Tuka a lot. First the Czechs restrict Slovak language rights, then they begin a forced secularisation campaign against them, then this. He was released early, in 1939, and was soon able to reap sweet revenge. Hitler had already been granted the Sudetenland by the Munich Conference, without firing a shot, and now forced Slovakia, threatened with German, Hungarian and Polish dismemberment if refused, to declare independence on March 14th. The head of the local Slovak government, after Hlinka's death, Josef Tiso, despite having been put under arrest by the Czech government, was opposed to this, but went along with it, especially since Hitler later invaded Czechoslovakia, and it was clear that if he'd refused, he would be next. Slovak independence was declared on March 14th, Tiso became president, and appointed Tuka as his prime minister. Tuka, much more radical than Tiso, and by now much more inclined toward National Socialism than Catholicism, jumped at the chance to exploit his new position. His ally, Alexander Mach, led the Hlinka Guard, the Slovak People's Party's militia, as well as being prime minister. Tuka now had control over the Senate, and immediately began enacting pro-German policies. He fawningly referred to Hitler as "my Führer", and informed him that he placed the destiny of the Slovak people in his hands. Tiso didn't like this. He didn't like fascism, but Tuka had the support of Hitler and couldn't be removed, and since it was Tuka, Mach and the others who got Tiso to go along with invading Poland, his position was strengthened further. Then, at the Salzburg Conference on July 28, 1940, it was agreed upon, largely by one side, that there would be closer cooperation with Germany. Against Tiso's wishes, it was decided upon that there would be a dual command between the Slovak People's Party and the Hlinka Guard, and an escalation in anti-Jewish policies. The Reich appointed Manfred von Killinger as the German representative in Slovakia, and Tiso, unwillingly, accepted all these agencies, and created 2 new state ministries to deal with so-called Jewish affairs. On September 3rd, against Tiso's will, Tuka led the Slovak Assembly in enacting Constitutional Law 210, authorising the government to do everything necessary to exclude Jews from economic and social life, and then Tuka and von Ribbentrop signed a protocol, entering Slovakia into an alliance with Germany, Japan and Italy. In 1940, Dieter Wisłany was sent as a, quote, advisor on Jewish affairs to Tuka's government, and alongside him, without Tiso's participation, Tuka composed the Jewish Code, 270 articles denying rights to Slovak Jews and requiring that they wear the yellow star, confiscating Jewish property and expelling them from the capital. Tiso, who had opposed the code and seen it enforced without his signature, considered resigning, but, fatally, pushed by some of the bishops and several Jewish leaders, he decided to stay. This, however, didn't stop Tuka. In 1942, he strongly advocated deporting the entirety of Slovakia's Jewish population to concentration camps. Ultimately, 20,000 were deported, and the Slovak government, to add insult to injury, had to pay 500 Reichsmarks per deportee. Tiso, who hadn't wanted this plan, even went along with it anyway, leading a scornful Hitler to remark, "It is interesting how this little Catholic priest Tiso is sending us the Jews." He, however, didn't go along with it for long. The deportation of Slovak Jews was halted in October 1942, but this hadn't stopped over 57,000 Jews being sent to Nazi death camps. It also hadn't stopped Tiso, sending 51,000 troops to help invade the Soviet Union, which eventually degenerated into a disaster, with disgusted Slovak soldiers mutinying, going over to the Soviets, or simply going home. By 1944, with the Soviet Union steamrolling west, Tuka's position looked ambivalent at best, and he may soon have had to leave his own home. And this he ended up doing, not so much because of the approaching Russians, but because of his encroaching illness. His health had deteriorated, to a point where he couldn't work, and, at the beginning of 1944, he resigned. This could have given Tiso a chance to get some power back, especially since Mach went too, but then the huge Slovak national uprising broke out, which the Germans used as an excuse to steamroll in, take control, and deport another 13,000 Jews, as well as laying waste to large numbers of villages. By now, however, Tuka was living a quiet village-star life. Having suffered a stroke, which confined him to a wheelchair, he, his wife, attendants and doctor had emigrated to Austria, where he lived at a spa, in comfort, before he was comfortably arrested by Allied troops and handed over to the officials of the renewed Czechoslovak state. Much like Tiso, following a brief trial, Tuka was executed by hanging on August 20th, 1946, literally being dragged up out of his wheelchair and garroted. The once mighty, once powerful fascist, reduced to a helpless, hanged man. Many people who cooperated with the Nazis have seen something of a reputation resurgence. Stepan Bandera, Leon de Grelle, the Latvian SS. All kinds of people who cooperated, some because they wanted freedom for their people, have been rehabilitated. But not Vojtech Tuka. Even the Slovak right ignores him, and even some of those who venerate Tiso, in spite of 67,000 of Slovakia's 89,000 Jews being deported, don't like Tuka. He kowtowed to Hitler, told him he placed the nation in his hands, called him my Führer, agreed for Hitler's interests over that of his own government, Nazified the Helinka Guard and Parliament. Tuka was one of the key people in why the Slovak state fell apart and collapsed, and, had Tuka not been around, and had Tiso had a spine, the First Slovak Republic would be seen as a much more favourable state today. Andrej Helinka, the Slovak People's Party leader, is seen as a national hero. Certain elements of the Slovak army are seen as heroes. Even Tiso is seen as a hero, but Tuka, nobody sees Tuka as a hero. Tuka is just forsaken and forgotten, unwanted and unloved, another hollow vessel for power, who hollowed out his people for an advantage.